All right, seventh grade. In this screencast, I'm going to talk about independent and dependent variables. This is what we talked about earlier, and the first slide here is sort of a review of the experiment that you may have already done or you will be doing, depending on which group you're in. And it's the experiment in which we use a candle to create a vacuum inside a glass that will pull water in from a plate into the glass, and you'll see the water level rise. And so if we just do this experiment by itself with just a candle and a cup of water, we have right down here, we have our chart, we have the candle, and we have the height of water. Right now, because we only use one condition or one candle, in this case, it's just a demonstration experiment. It's not really an experiment in the sense that we're comparing things. If we want to make this have an independent and dependent variable, a more clear conditions in which it's a real experiment, then we need to do this. We need to add conditions. So we're going to add some candles. So in this case, we're going to add candle 2 and candle 3. Now, what we're changing in the experiment is very clear. Before, when we just had a single candle, we weren't changing anything in the experiment, so we didn't have an independent variable. Now that we've added different sizes of candles, we now have an independent variable. And one thing that you can always help you is look at the chart that you create for your data that you're going to record in your experiment. The chart, the independent variable will always be listed prior to completing the experiment. So you can create a lab report and you should be able to know what the independent variable is based on what you have in your chart that you'll do your data. Now, the dependent variable will not be filled in, and generally the dependent variable is going to be a number. So in this case, our dependent variable is the height of the water, and that's going to be blank. So we'll be able to put down our dependent variable as the height of the water, but we won't know what those are. So the independent variable, you're going to know all of your conditions, and it's just what changes in the experiment. And the dependent variable is what you measure, and generally speaking, it's typically some sort of quantifiable number or value or measurement. So let's look at a couple more, because you guys are going to do that on your own. Here's another example of an experiment. Diet Coke and Mentos. This is a fairly common thing that people like to do. You know, if you put some Diet Coke and Mentos together, it will create a fairly large reaction, kind of like the picture over here. However, if you only do Mentos, there's no independent variable because you're not changing any conditions. So to create a real experiment out of this with the independent variable, we throw in a couple of other types of mints, and we can measure the level of reaction with Altoids, with Lifesavers, and with Mentos. So now I can add my independent variable. What am I changing? Not just Mentos, but Altoids or Lifesavers. And what am I measuring? The dependent variable right here. I'm measuring the level of reaction. So I can say which one has the biggest reaction, Mentos, Altoids, or Lifesavers. And I can rate those as like 1, 2, or 3, or give some sort of a verbal description of the type of reaction. So once again, what am I changing in the experiment? I'm changing the type of mint, in this case Mentos, Altoids, or Lifesavers, and I'm measuring the dependent variable, the level of reaction that each mint causes. Here's another experiment from last year. Last year, a couple guys for science fair did an air quality experiment, and what they did is they put Vaseline on a plate, and then they posted that plate in a room, and then they measured sort of how many particles of dust and so forth that were collected on the plate. Now, if they had just done a single room, there would not have been an independent variable in the experiment. It just would have been a demonstration. What they did is they put it in multiple rooms, and by putting it in room 1, room 2, and room 3, it's created an independent variable. We're now changing the room. So the independent variable is always what you change. So in this case, we've got room 1, 2, and 3. What we're measuring, the dependent variable, again, is the amount of dust in each room. And again, just to review, the independent variable is always going to be, each condition of the independent variables are always going to be listed. The dependent variable is always going to have blank spaces for where you will fill in the data from your experiment, because you can't measure something until you've completed the experiment. Lastly, another experiment that you'll be doing later in the year will have to do with your heart rate. And so here's a picture of 2 babies resting. And so if we just took the heart rate of those babies resting, we wouldn't really have much to compare to. Now we actually have 2 kids here, so we could compare those, but we want to compare something else. We want to compare your resting heart rate to your active heart rate. Okay, And so I'm going to put active. And then I'm also going to throw on another condition. So we're going to have the level of activity, and I'm going to call this a recovery. So you're going to have resting, active, and recovery. So our independent variable, what are we changing? What are conditions in the experiment? We're changing the activity level. So you're going to be resting, you're going to be active, or you're going to be recovering. And what we're measuring for this very simple experiment is how many beats per minute is your heart going. So obviously when you're resting, your heartbeat's going to be a little lower. When you're active, it's going to be higher. And when you're in recovery, it will probably be somewhere in between. So quick review of our experiments that we looked at in the IVs and DVs. In our candle experiment, our independent variable that we are changing are the types of candles, in fact, the size of the candle. We're measuring the dependent variable, which is the height of the water in the glass. In this experiment, we are changing the types of mints. The independent variable would be the types of mints, either Mentos, Altoids, or Lifesavers, and we are measuring the level of reaction with Diet Coke. In the paper plate experiment, we are changing the independent variable, which is the rooms, room 1, 2, or 3, and we are measuring the amount of dust in each room. And finally, in the last experiment, we were changing the activity level, whether you were resting, active, or recovering, and then that was the independent variable. And then the dependent variable that we are measuring is the beats per minute of your heart rate. So I hope that gives you a clear progression of the independent and dependent variables.